Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Shadow and Sun Show, and welcome back to another Advanced Dungeons and Dragons review. This time, the dreaded Manual of the Planes. This book, while not one of my favorites, and not for the obvious reasons, and that usually being that a lot of dungeon masters out there just don't like running the higher level campaigns or adventures. For me, I just didn't need this book because I already knew everything in it in respect to my own campaign world. I was going to run the various planes, the heavens, the hells, the alignment planes, the elemental planes, and of course my favorite plane, the plane of shadow, that for whatever reason is not here in this book, but that's actually better because that's my plane. You kind of need to ask permission before you go traipsing around there because, trust me, it's not for the faint of heart. But for me, this book just, like I said, I didn't need it. But for those of you who are new to the game or who were new to the game, this book was probably invaluable. There's a ton of great info in here, a lot of details and facts and figures, and helpful tips and advice and all that good stuff in this book, which was put out in 1987. Jeff Grubb was the author, I do believe, and I'm not even gonna. No, never mind. I was just gonna say something, but that's really just not nice, and we don't need to go there tonight. Lots of diagrams on how the various dimensions and planes are shaped and formed, and how they align with one another. There's a lot of good information on how spells would react and act differently in the different planes. The ethereal plane, which to be honest was not one I really used all that much. The astral plane was more often the place that I used, mostly because of my research into the paranormal. The ethereal plane was kind of a made-up thing, whereas the astral plane supposedly existed in the metaphysical world and mythology and things like that for centuries, probably. I'm not exactly 100% on that. The inner planes, those being, the earth, water, fire, smoke, all those weird places, which, believe it or not, I actually used quite a bit. My own plane of water is, to this day, still legendary. But I always thought of these places as conceptually just out of bounds for most players. I don't care how much fire resistance you have, you're not made of fire. And maybe you were, and then, this wasn't a problem because there were a few characters I can think of that this wouldn't have been a problem for. But for the most part, traipsing around in a place of nothing but fire or smoke or even air, I don't care how good you are at flying, eventually you're going to get tired of flying and you gotta rest, and what, you just fall forever? Oh, okay, that might be cool. Personally, whenever I have those falling dreams, I'm not a big fan of that. The parallel elemental planes, I get it, but they're just, to me, they seemed a little silly. But I understand that the way the fabric of the Dungeons and Dragons universe is made up, that those places would exist where the other places touch, etc. Okay, elemental plane of Earth. That could be, a lot of fun, to be quite honest. It's probably the only plane that I think we could really, except for the lack of air or the poisonous clouds of different, melted metals and things like that going on. To be honest, I really prefer the Arduin descriptions of all of the planes in the Arduin books. They were much more hazardous, much more dangerous. The positive and negative material planes just seemed also just, something that had to be there, but never really going to be a thing. You go to the negative plane dimension, what have you, you're just snuffed out. You go to the positive, yeah, you might just as easily be snuffed out. The outer planes of the alignments, I get it. They're just various versions of heaven and hell and limbo and things like that. That's cool, but honestly, not really places characters should ever go to, except maybe in a fever dream or a vision, or without their primary deity just pulling them in. It just seemed a little bit too, I don't want to say gonzo, but a little bit too just beyond the pale, just too much for normal mortals to ever go to. And adventuring was, unless you were on a mission from one god to go do something against another god, it just really seemed like just too much. It's just, for me, I rarely ever use them, trying to squeeze through the dimensions. Although, I will codify that with no great epic adventures complete without a journey to hell. That's just me personally. I can think of dozens of times where the players intentionally or inadvertently ended up in hell, and that was one of the scariest places you could go because, well, for obvious reasons, it kind of should be the scariest place you can go, other than some various planets out in space and that kind of thing. But for your fantasy D&D characters, unless you're playing Spelljammer, which I'm going to go back and talk about again, because I don't think it's getting a fair shake. At least the old version. The new version can pretty much, that's I haven't read it. I've seen some videos on it, and I don't really like talking about things that I can't say I've at least read. I think that's only fair. Wouldn't you guys agree? The appendix, lots of cool stuff in here. Charts on creating treasure and elemental creatures, the number of appearance, the different types of there's a small monster section in here that includes things like archons and things like that, angels and demons and devils, the powers and things that they would have. And obviously it ends up with a subject index and a spell index, which all are pretty handy if you're going to be going there. Just like if you go into an underwater adventure, there's a lot of things that are going to be different. A lot of spells aren't going to work. A lot of spells might work differently than you expect, depending on where you go. And that's really helpful. Real curious to see, if any of you guys enjoyed this book, because I know there's nothing but negativity out there in the interwebs, and I don't really care. If you didn't like it, I get it. It's not my favorite book either. But that's not to say I don't use the information that's more or less in here on my own, and my own take on it, because as everybody knows, I run a lot of high-level games, and I like the challenge of it. It's more a challenge for me than for other DMs, because they're out. 10th level, I'm done. I can't come up with a challenge for you. Sorry to hear that, but I didn't run this game for a year and a half just to call it quits because I couldn't handle it. Nah, come on, it's a game. It's fantasy. I can always, like I joke, I can add a couple of zeros to the hit points, and trust me, that's a challenge. No matter who you are, you have to agree, and I'm only, half serious when I say that there's so many other ways to create a challenge. And this book and these ideas are the perfect example. Send your players to the elemental plane of fire. Have them, sail their ship into the elemental plane of water and, try to find their way back. There's so many great ideas once you leave your home world that I really want to hear from you guys what you thought of this, or just your adventures. If you're like me and you run your own dimensions and your own planes your way, because that's the way it should be. It's your damn game. Do what you want, and hopefully everybody will have a great time. I know my players, for the most part, have had a great time, to the point where they often go back to that plane of water, and maybe one of these days I'll share the secret why they go back, but not today. I've already put out enough information for you guys to consume and mull over and get back to me on, because I really, like I said, I want to hear what you guys enjoyed about your planar journeys to other dimensions, alternate universes, maybe even those of few of you who've braved the plane of shadow. let me know. I'd love to hear about it. And until then, have a great weekend. Play some games. We love you guys, and we will see you guys real soon. Good night.